part 2 for this news report today, and it's Thursday, February 28th, 2013. My website is ggnonline.com, and on YouTube, my channels are ddarko2012 and ddarko2013. All right, so we left off with this article right here, and I've mentioned many times about the Brookings Institute policy for regime change on Assad. It's an official policy, like a PowerPoint presentation on how to basically remove Syria's leader, so, and then in the guise of human rights by aiding terrorists to take them down. So this article says, in a news conference today in London, Secretary of State Kerry slammed the Syrian government for offering peace talks to the rebels, insisting that he didn't believe they should be taken seriously and promising to step up U.S. involvement in the ongoing civil war. So it says here, Kerry said the days of the rebels wondering where their support is or if it's coming is over, and the Obama administration is determined to hasten the regime change that it has been pressing for in recent months. And that's why the opposition doesn't want talks, because they want regime change. So they know what the policy is by their funders, by their backers. So the U.S. State Department's Syriasly campaign reaches new level of absurdity. So this is from the Land Destroyer report. It says, while the West and its Arab partners, the brutally autocratic regimes of Saudi Arabia and Qatar, are now immediately funneling heavy weapons to al-Qaeda's stronghold in Dara, southern Syria, the U.S. State Department and its extensive network of NGOs funded by the same corporate financier interests that writes its policy have rolled out a front organization they call Syriasly. So this is part of the whole EU regime change and democracy funding, slush fund basically. So this human rights organization fraud already screams biased pro-Western propaganda with its al-Qaeda French colonial green, red, and black logo, aping the so-called Free Syrian Army's flag. That it is a campaign of stand confirms without a doubt that it is manufactured propaganda directly funded by the special interests who designed and are currently executing the assault on Syria. So they describe itself as a campaign and student-led movement to end mass atrocities, such as Darfur and Sudan. So it goes on, it says, sporting the French colonial colors that flew over Syria during its Western subjugation and echoing the now defunct fraud that is the responsibility to protect our R2P, which led to, not prevented, mass nationwide genocide in Libya in the wake of NATO's brutal bombardment of the North African nation in 2011, seriously attempts to pose as student-led. However, they are merely a carbon copy of the U.S. State Department corporate special interests fronts masquerading as human rights crusaders to manufacture consent for long plans of war, of profit and domination. Saudi Arabia supplies militants in Syria with Croatian arms, says a report. A new report has revealed that Saudi Arabia supplied foreign-backed militants in Syria with large cargoes of infantry and heavy weapons through Jordan, although Jordan is basically denying it. So this is coming from the New York Times. One Western official says the thousands of rifles and hundreds of machine guns and an unknown quantity of ammunitions were among the weapons shipped to Syria. There was an article I saw today about the Syrian rebels also acquiring tanks somehow from the Syrian government. Germany sells arms to Arab states to protect Israel. Germany's defense minister says arms sales to Arab states of the Persian Gulf is aimed at protecting Israel. The remarks come at a time when the country has been strongly criticized for the dramatic increase in arms sales to Arab states like Saudi Arabia, despite their poor human rights record. He added that defending Israel against Iran is more important than human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. U.S. military training of militant gangs in Syria is underway. They've begun training of anti-Damascus militant gangs at an unidentified regional base in hopes of hastening the fall of the Syrian government and gain influence over the perceived aftermath. So the training mission is already underway and represents the deepest U.S. intervention, for the first time directly funding and supplying of, quote, non-lethal assistance and equipment, end quote, to the armed gangs that are evidently engaged in terror and destruction across the nation to bring down the government of Assad. So it says, we are examining and developing ways to accelerate the political transition that the Syrian people want, says U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Kerry's claims of representing the desires of the Syrian people are identical to these proclamations made by other senior American officials that waged and supported destructive wars on faraway nations under the pretext of delivering democratic values. From the Times of Israel, it says Assad's army has fled entire area bordering Israel. Rebels now control the whole Syrian side of Golan Heights. An activist tells Times of Israel, they always say activists, fighters refrain from taking this crossing for fear of political ramifications. It's weird that you see this picture of these people. They say regime prisoners are being questioned by a member of the Free Syrian Army, and they look like just regular dudes, like not even militia. So an anti-Assad activist, or terrorist, whatever, says, in fact, the regime wants the rebels to take control of all villages on the border area so that Israel intervenes in the conflict, and then Assad can accuse Israel of conspiring against him, as if they're not doing it already. The fact is that that part actually belonged to Syria to begin with, but Israel occupied it and never let it go. That's why you have to be careful when they create buffer zones or start expanding. They occupy it and they don't let it go. And it's funny because Israel is one of the biggest proponents of using that tactic of I'm being attacked, and they allow themselves to be attacked, or they attack themselves and fund their enemies so that they can play the victim and go on the real attack. Israel says a mortar shell from Syria lands in Golan. Well, just like the mortar shell that landed in Turkey was actually coming from the rebels, because they're the ones that use it mostly. A mortar shell fired from Syria exploded in the Israeli-controlled Golan Heights on Wednesday, falling in an open area and causing no casualties. UN staffer missing on Israel-Syria border. So says Sky Arabia says Carl Campo, Austria-born legal advisor to force monitoring ceasefire, abducted on February 7th. So Sky Arabia reported Monday that the advisor to the commander of the United Nations force monitoring the ceasefire in Golan Heights was kidnapped on February 7th. Syrian rebels, they say, have recently gained control over several towns in the Golan area, but it remains unclear whether they were involved in the kidnapping. So, remember, Assad's army has fled the entire border of Israel. Now, I don't know if this is exactly true, but this is coming from the Times of Israel saying that Assad's army is not on the border of Israel. And so I would just conclude that it's the rebels that kidnapped this UN staffer on this Israeli border. But how else do I know that? Well, I know it because the rebels have been known for kidnapping. They were caught by Lebanese journalists. They've also been caught killing journalists. Criminals cash in on Syria's chaos with kidnappings and ransoms. Not all the kidnappings in Syria are politically driven. That's right. In lawless areas not held by either the government or the opposition, kidnappers are increasingly driven by cold cash. Again, so how do I know this is the rebels? Well, the rebels actually are stealing and damaging and acquiring antiquities that go back, hundreds, if not 1,000 years, really, really old stuff. And they're stealing it to sell it to fund their terrorist operations. So I know that they're carrying out the kidnapping, and I know that they're doing this. So all's fair in love and war. Syria rebels are tried kidnapping to fund, raise funds for the revolution. So it says here that the Free Syrian Army group that is cracking down on abductions made by gangs of opportunists are also running their own kidnapping operations to raise funds for the invasion of Syria. So the terrorists know who the rich families are in Aleppo. They watch their homes and movements. But hey, it remains unclear whether these Free Syrian Army was involved in the kidnapping. Okay, Obama to tell Netanyahu, U.S. gearing up for Iran strike. So here we're going to hear this for the 1,000,000th time. During upcoming visit, President will convey message that window for American military operation opens in June. So he says here, when Obama visits Israel next month, he will tell Netanyahu that a window of opportunity for a military strike on Iran will open in June. Israel should sit tight and let Washington take the stage, even if it means remaining on the sidelines during the U.S. military operation. What's important to note here as far as Hagel goes, going off that last video, the second video, and how he's, it's just the same crap being repackaged and sold to the world and to Americans and people in the Middle East, is that we're anti-Israel now, the U.S. is. And there's this big standoff between Obama and Netanyahu, even though Obama actually just received an award for being such a pro-staunch Zionist and supporter of Israel. That Hagel himself is not really anti-Israel. He was pro-Patriot Act, he was pro-Iraq War, Afghanistan War. But this is what I think. They do this for a reason. It's to give Iran the impression, their intelligence apparatus, to sift through this media, whatever, and maybe bite on this and say, well, look, there's this big feud between Israel and the U.S. Israel's by themselves. If we strike them, they'll be left out on their own. Because they've actually made statements, the White House and that, and Pentagon has, about how they won't support an attack on Iran. But if Iran thinks that they're vulnerable and the U.S. doesn't support them, maybe they're trying to trigger a preemptive attack by Iran. The president, Ahmadinejad, aids candidacy of a challenge to Iran's theocratic status quo. So kind of weird a headline to actually say. But the former vice president backs separation of mosque and state. And his final term in office is just months from completion, with a June election setting the stage for his leaving office in August. Says if he gets his way, his successor will be his chief of staff and former vice president, Moshe. So it says here, which is an internal battle in Iran with a long history. Moshe was appointed as vice president in 2009, but was forced to resign shortly thereafter, facing objectives from the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the nation's supreme leader. It sets the stage for years of battles between Ahmadinejad and religious hardliners who saw his cabinet as full of cronies with dubious religious ties. Moshe's own side and Ahmadinejad's personal prayer leader was even arrested on a charge of sorcery in 2011 by religious police based on allegations of religious deviationism. At the core of all this, Ahmadinejad's administration's own tendency towards secularism, and Moshe exemplifies this, publicly complaining in recent talks that clerics are taking too big a role in Iranian politics, and that the constitution should be changed to delineate a clear separation of mosque and state. So such comments go well beyond controversial in Iran. Officially a theocracy, they are downright revolutionary. Ahmadinejad's ability to even survive to the end of his last term after openly clashing with Khamenei is a surprise to many, but he seems to set to double down with his backing for Moshe and is trying to make a lasting change to Iran's system of government. Then we have South African police drag man who later dies. So go in there and check it out. They bound his hands to the rear of a van and then sped off, dragging the slender taxi driver along the pavement as a crowd of onlookers shouted in dismay. The man was later found dead. It's a gun-wrenching video of the scene is all more disturbing because the man who abused the Mozambican immigrant were uniformed South African police officers, and the van was a marked police vehicle. These are the same place where they actually shot 30, 50 miners when they were striking. Then to the Congo, you have, despite peace accord, Eastern Congo appears on the brink of renewed conflict. Despite the signing of a Congo peace accord on Sunday, this Central African country remains unsettled by signs of a return to war. The peace agreement signed in Ethiopia by 11 neighboring countries and backed by the United Nations, and I think the U.S. as well, elicited much praise from African and other world leaders who said it points the way to stability in Congo. But on the ground in eastern Congo, there's signals that fighting may soon erupt between the Congolese government and the M23 rebels, which they have. I think 10 people died just the other day. The regional peace accord is helpful, but it does not have specifics to immediately improve the tense security situation, said an expert on Congo. So two things. The agreement did not mention the much-awaited intervention forces that would come to reinforce the UN peacekeeping troops in eastern Congo, nor did it state how a drone force could patrol the border. We got drones in a Niger drone base now. So another problem is that no conclusion has been reached in the negotiations between M23 rebels and the Kinshasa government. I saw an article too about how these drones, U.S. drones and that, are going to be used to aid in fighting terrorists in Algeria. Lastly, Uganda army deploys at the Democratic Republic of Congo border. Uganda's People's Defense Forces have deployed heavily at the Uganda-Congo border. It says here, following renewed fighting between the Mai Mai militia and the M23 rebels close to the Uganda border. So they're fighting for control of the borderline. The Mai Mai claims that the area belongs to them. It's her ancestral land. All right, so I'm going to leave off here. Join me in part 3. This is GGN, and I'm Darko. Thank you.